Today's horror story is written by streakersauce. I hated my job. I despised my boss, loathed my coworkers, and would rather pull out my own teeth than work another day. So I decided to quit. I never even liked math in the first place. So why the hell had I decided to become an accountant? I guess it had been a combination of pressure from my parents and an easy job to keep, but I couldn't do it anymore. Of course, this meant I had to find another way to support myself. But as I stopped to think about it, I didn't like doing anything. Nothing sounded fun, or even just not miserable. Maybe I just wasn't meant to work. But none of this matters. Either way, I had 2 dogs to feed and an alcohol problem to maintain. So I began searching for ways to make easy money. Now, I know what you're thinking. Cameron, if it were that easy, no one would be hungry or homeless. I know, but I was desperate. So I started looking online. I was almost about to start selling pictures of my own feet when I spotted the ad. It was pretty generic, just a flash of red text on a blue background that said, "Make money quick. $500 to $1,000 in minutes." So, stupidly, I clicked on it. At first, it seemed like it was a broken link. It asked me for my name, but I used a nickname because it seemed suspicious. It cut to a black screen, and I was about to close my tab. Then suddenly a red light began flashing in the corner, and I realized I was looking at what appeared to be a live feed. In the middle of a dimly lit room was a man in a chair. His hands seemed to be tied behind his back, and he was slumped forward as if he was unconscious. I watched in uncomfortable silence, waiting expectantly. I grew uneasier by the minute, and once again began to close the tab when the man began to stir. He threw his head back, and I saw his face for the first time. He was horribly beaten, his left eye completely black and swollen shut. He had an open gash above his eyebrow that bled freely. His nose seemed crooked and broken, and his lip was split. As he came to, his good eye began darting around the room. He was fidgeting and trembling, looking absolutely terrified of something just off camera. Seeing the look on his face scared me, even though I had no idea who he was or if this was even real. Was this a movie? A shitty home video attempt? What was I even watching? As I considered closing the tab for the 3rd time in a span of 10 minutes, a banner with 2 buttons suddenly began flashing on the bottom of my screen. The words "hot" or "cold" flashed brightly. What? Was this a game of Would You Rather? Confused, I chose hot. Nothing happened at first. Then from a door I hadn't previously noticed, a woman in a nurse's outfit walked in, wheeling something in with her. As I looked closer, I saw it was a small table. On it was a black kettle sitting atop a small induction stovetop and a big steel bowl. As she walked in, the man began thrashing in his restraints, desperately attempting to get away. I watched my screen closely as she calmly took the bowl and emptied the boiling water into it. She wore thick black gloves to protect herself from the heat, I suppose. She placed the bowl back onto the table, looking at the man with pity. Then she said something to him and pointed towards the corner. No, not the corner, the camera. The man looked straight at the camera, straight at me, his eyes pleading. The woman looked at me too, straight into my eyes it seemed, and waved slowly. Then, to my horror, she grabbed the bowl of boiling water and poured it over the man's head in a swift movement. He thrashed wildly. His muffled wails turned to sobs as his skin began to blister from the water. He was bright red, horrible blisters beginning to completely cover his forehead, neck, and shoulders. The woman took off her mask, smiled at the camera, and then slowly walked off camera. A small 200 appeared in the corner of the screen, but I had no idea what it meant. All I could do was stare. Had I been able to choose what happened to him? What the fuck? Who were these sick fucks? I grabbed my phone to call the police. I couldn't watch this man be tortured, and I certainly couldn't choose what they did to him. I needed to tell some authority who could find him or help him or something. As I began to dial, A notification dinged and a banner flashed across the top of my phone screen. My bank account app showed I just received $200 from a company with a name I can't even pronounce. What the fuck? Who was doing this? Where did all this money even come from? And more importantly, what was the purpose of this all? I desperately searched for the answers, but found none. I slowly put my phone away and looked back at the screen. I really needed the money. Desperately. But was it worth it? Before I could decide, another banner appeared on the screen below the man. As I read it, my stomach sank and I began to feel nauseous. The buttons flashed with two options again, one red and one blue. Teeth or fingers. I stared at both options, uncertain of what to do. Finally, after several seconds, I hesitantly clicked on fingers. Almost immediately, my webcam light turned on. The green light blinked at me as I stared at my screen, dumbfounded. I tried to close the tab, but I no longer had that option. Then, another muffled scream brought my attention back to the man. From the very corner of the camera, different from where the nurse entered, another man, dressed head to toe in a surgeon's outfit, stepped into the dim light. He wielded a small tray of items, which, to my dismay, I recognized as surgical tools. I watched, horrified, as he picked up a huge pair of pliers. He approached the man in the chair and undid his restraints. He was too weak to even fight it. The surgeon took his hand and placed it on the table in front of him. He took a thick leather strap and stretched it tightly over the table, strapping his hand down. He then took the man's left ring finger, placing it between the pliers. Then the surgeon glanced at the camera and, giving me a disgusting smile, forced them shut. A sickening crunch, followed by muffled screaming, made me turn and vomit into the trash can beside my table. I desperately searched for ways to close the tab, but as soon as I began looking, a small green square popped up in the corner. $3.75. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My phone screen lit up with another notification. My heart skipped a beat as I saw my bank account app, once again letting me know I had been sent $375 from the same company. The surgeon placed the pliers back on the tray and exited from where he had come from, leaving the tray behind. What the fuck? What the fuck? I knew I had to call the police. They had to do something to find this guy or help him or something. To my horror, though, I realized I'd have to explain that I was watching this poor stranger be brutally tortured as I chose what happened to him, and I was getting paid for it. The police would think I'm crazy. Hell, they may even think I was in on it. Looking back now, I should have called them sooner. I could have explained how I'd found this twisted feed and maybe helped the guy. I'm sure they'd understand. But instead, I found myself staring at my bank account, reading $575 over and over. I had made over $600 in only a couple of minutes, and I didn't even have to do anything. Maybe if I picked the most harmless answers, he'd be fine, and I could still get some money before calling the cops. So I turned my attention back to my screen, another banner flashing across the bottom. This time it seemed like the choice was really simple, red or black. Maybe this was a trick question. I had no idea, but I chose red. Bad choice. The surgeon came back in, this time with both hands behind his back. For the first time I heard him speak. This time, unlike the nurse, he spoke loudly so I could hear.
This here is courtesy of our dear friend, Cameron.
My blood ran cold as I heard my name. The surgeon went on.
He doesn't know you, and he doesn't know our sponsors either, but he's getting paid quite handsomely to choose what happens to you. You see, Jackson, some people pay a lot of money to see bad things happen to bad people. Now, Cameron chose red. Lucky for you, this time it wouldn't make a difference. You see, behind me I have a red hammer and a black hammer. Regardless of the color, it'll shatter the tiny bones in your hand just the same. You can thank good old Cam for that.
My stomach was in knots and sweat was dripping down my back. I watched, eyes wide and terrified, as the man who I now knew was Jackson stared right into the camera, right at me, with a look I can only describe as utmost despair. The surgeon drew his hand back, and with one swift blow shattered Jackson's hand. The thud, followed by a crack and more desperate, muffled screams, made me sick again. 500 flashed in the corner of my screen, but I'd seen enough. My phone let me know I just received another $500, but I didn't care. My hand shook violently as I called the police and gave them my address. This way I could show them the live feed. Maybe they'd believe me, and if I was lucky I wouldn't be arrested too. I waited for them to arrive, looking at the man on my screen. He was now covered in red and yellow blisters, his face more swollen than before. His hand, still strapped to the table, was missing a finger, grossly disfigured, and had already begun turning purple. Who is doing this? The surgeon had talked about sponsors paying to see this. He called Jackson a bad person, but this was way too far, even for the worst of the worst. As my mind quickly jumped around thousands of questions, another banner began flashing on my screen. My heart rate, already impossibly fast, quickened as I read my options. Smiley face or heart? This had to be a joke, right? Some sick, twisted joke in a sick, twisted game. This was all an elaborate prank on me. Red-hot rage began rising in me as I clicked smiley face, just to see what would happen. Another bad idea. The surgeon returned, this time wheeling in a gurney covered in straps. He released Jackson's wrist, then roughly placed him onto the gurney. He was too weak to even move, flopping around helplessly. I watched all this in utter disbelief. The surgeon strapped him down, making sure every strap was safely secured and tucked away before turning to the surgical tray. He picked up a scalpel, then turned back to the camera once again. He simply said, "Good choice," then turned towards Jackson. Seeing the scalpel, he began desperately trying to free himself from the restraints, thrashing and flailing to no avail. The surgeon clicked his tongue in disapproval and said, Now, it'll only hurt more this way." Jackson whimpered as the surgeon laughed, then carefully began carving a smiley face into his stomach. Blood poured from the wounds as the surgeon cut deeper and deeper, and Jackson's cries grew louder. Where the fuck were the police? Why were they taking so damn long? The corner flashed to 7:50 seconds before my phone screen lit up again. $750 more from that same goddamn company. Suddenly, there was a knocking at my door. As I began to turn my chairs towards the door, the surgeon looked towards the camera, bewildered, almost as if turning towards the noise. Had he heard it too? Were they listening to me this whole goddamn time? I quickly got up and opened the door, letting the two dispatched officers in. I finally got to the ad. I told them how I had clicked it, not expecting anything, and then had to watch some random guy get tortured, and even worse, had to choose what happened to him. I told them about the money and about everything I had watched him endure over the past half hour. The officers stared at me, their expression shifting from confused to uncomfortable to absolutely shocked. They asked me to show them the live stream, so I led them to my room. As I looked at my screen, I was faced with a big "live stream ended" flashing in red caps. There was no trace of the surgeon, the nurse, or Jackson. Not even that dirty, dim room. Just a black screen. No, this couldn't be happening. Why would anyone do this? This had to be a sick prank. I had so many questions and no answers. The officers looked at me, their eyes full of what seemed like pity. They took me in for questioning, but with no evidence and absolutely no indications that any crime had taken place. All they could do was release me and recommend psychiatric help. They thought I was crazy. When I finally got home, I sat in front of my computer for a good while, thinking about what to do. How did I know any of it was even real? What if it was all fake? Just a way to mess with random people on the internet. I contacted a buddy of mine that's a cop, and he sent me a link. I pulled up a missing person database and searched for any people named Jackson. All that turned up was a kid that had gone missing a week ago, but the Jackson I had seen was a full-grown man, so it couldn't be. So, no victim. Next, I opened up my bank account app and checked the deposits I had received. I typed the company's name into my search bar, but once again my search found nothing. I banged my desk in frustration. I spent hours trying to decide what to do, but realized there was nothing in my control. I knew what I had seen. There was no way I had imagined it. I wasn't sick and twisted enough to come up with that shit. But turns out, I was twisted enough to realize that money is money, and sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. So, 3 days later, when the same ad popped up again, I sighed deeply before clicking on it. The money was good, and I needed it to survive. As the live stream began, a dimly lit room came into view. This time Jackson wasn't there, but the surgeon was. With an evil, twisted grin, he spoke directly into the camera.
Welcome back, Cameron. We're going to have so much fun.
Seems like something always pops up to adds to your trouble. Thank you for listening, and you can handle another horror story, right?